It's called conditional positive regard. When someone, anyone in your life only provides support, love, and any kind of positive regard of you, if and only if you meet certain conditions that are predetermined by them. So here's why that's important, is because a lot of our education and schooling is created around this positive regard or conditional positive regard. But what happens is because right at the beginning of our schooling years, we are conditioned this way that we will only receive support, love, and any kind of positive regard if we meet certain conditions, if we get a gold star. Then what happens is, as we grow, as we get into the work environment, and we realize that yes, even in the work environment, to be honest, this is still very much the case, we get trained and conditioned to perform in order to be rewarded, in order to be loved, in order to be supported, in order to be seen, in order to be heard. So if you're done with that, if you want to challenge the status quo, if you've chased the stars and lost yourself and you're ready to unlearn gold star syndrome, then this is the episode for you. Welcome to this episode of The Unlearners podcast.
The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.
So this is definitely going to go down as one of my favorite episodes of all time, because I am a person who considers themselves a high achiever or a very performance-based individual with a crippling bias for action. And so doing this episode is, in a very real way, my unlearning journey, unraveling and unfolding. So we get to do this together, which for me is really exciting. So I want to start exactly there. And the way we're going to split this conversation, if you are someone who has gotten to a point where you've realized that because we were raised to earn the gold stars, to earn the text, to earn the affirmation, to earn the recognition, and the value, almost affirmation of our value, then you've wondered, why do I never feel like it's enough? Am I always seeking more and more? Then this is the episode where we're going to talk about that and talk about how deeply this runs, but also our performance-based self-worth that we carry on a day-to-day. A lot of it does start from the schooling system, but also it's continued throughout our adulthood, because even the work environment in today's world, or in the world, is very much built around exactly what we spoke about. So we're going to split this conversation really into three key themes. The first theme is we're going to talk about why achievement-based identity runs so deep, just to help us to understand some of the key psychology around it, but also where the socialization and conditioning actually has its roots. So we'll start right there, and this is an opportunity for you to really build up that self-awareness and to think about where a lot of it is coming from and to understand some of those roots. Second is we're going to go into how you and I can notice when we're chasing validation and not necessarily purpose aligned, or we're not living from our best, most vulnerable, truest version of ourselves. But instead what we're doing is we're wanting to be validated, and that's driving a lot of our performance, a lot of our learning, a lot of how we're showing up. And then right at the end, we'll close off with the tools for being or for building self-trust and not just a resume. So if you want to be a lot more personally trusting of yourself, what you bring to the table, the value you add, and be more conscious and present to your value, whether it's skills, expertise, how valuable you are to the marketplace, whatever it is, how do you stand in the self-trust of that value and not just in the ticking of a box and consistently jumping or dancing to someone else's drum? So that's what we're going to cover during the conversation today. And in all three of those parts, I hope that you will come away at the end of the episode with really just coming home to yourself, I think is the most important thing. If you have been one of those individuals that considers yourself an A player, it's important to understand that a lot of that A playing you have been conditioned into without even knowing it and unconsciously. And so how do you, one, bring awareness to that, and two, how do you regulate it so you are not consistently finding yourself in an environment where you are dancing to conditional positive regard and only performing because there is a gold star, because there is a system that's set up to reward you. And yes, systems that reward us are absolutely fantastic because they encourage key behaviors that organizations are wanting to encourage for various reasons. But also, it does mean that a lot of our drive and motivation is extrinsic or outside of ourselves. All right, so let's jump right into the beginning conversation. So why is achievement-based identity running so deep within us? So there's three key things here. Our early neural pathways for a lot of our self-concept are formed through our caregiver responses. So if you think about individuals like your teachers, if you think about individuals like specific caregivers within the home, like your maybe parents, maybe you had guardians instead of parents, or maybe you had a guardian that was a family member, or anyone within the home who provided you with key love. And when that individual showed you attention and love of any kind, and it was consistently followed by achievements or following achievements rather than just being there, consistently existing, then what happens is that our brains literally start to wire achievement as synonymous with safety. So if I achieve, then I will feel safe and I'll belong. And because these two have been conditioned as a package, or we've been conditioned that the two are mutually synonymous, or they happen in tandem, then what we do as we grow up, even as we start to challenge some perspectives, we literally grow up with that association between behavior and reward or achievement, and this love or attention, and the two become mutually synonymous. I think if I think about myself, if I think about myself, that's definitely the case. You know, my parents were phenomenal parents because they always encouraged us to do our best at school, academically, and both also in sports and cultural activities and various ways we were involved at school. But one of the key ways was through academics. And my phenomenal mother, who I love dearly, would really help us through adding some kind of a reward system that encouraged all of us as siblings to achieve or to do our best. However, what that did start to do with me, especially because there were so many areas in school where I was feeling fairly challenged that were more psychological than anything else, but I did find myself associating that love and attention with an achievement in academia. And so I would always want to get the gold stars and be one of the top children in the class and have the academic colors and all of these other things, in order to then go back home and receive, whether it was the hug or the money or the whatever it is. Now, having said that, I think that there definitely is room for those practices in parenting, in teaching, and in other environments. So it's not to say that they're not effective, because they absolutely are. And what they also do is they help children to understand that there is consistently a causal relationship happening between different things. And when any of us can apply ourselves in a particular way, it does tend to get a certain result. And so when you put systems like that in place, it does help children to reinstate or to learn that causal effect between different things. However, having said that, what does happen, like we mentioned a little bit earlier on, is that modern society does amplify that through what we spoke about right in the beginning, conditional positive regard. Not only does it start when we're children, when we're young, when we're in grade school, but everywhere, from our trophies, gamification on social media, workplace recognition systems of various kinds. They literally consistently carry out and reaffirm this conditional positive regard, that I associate a key behavior or a key win, and it's not necessarily the behavior per se, but it's the win that is at the front end of the behavior. Yes, it's the behavior we want, but because we gamify it, then you and I tend to then associate that. And because the attention or the validation is often not given unless the gold star or the trophy or the high achievement performer of the month is achieved, then we associate it. But if the love and the recognition and the attention and the care were given outside of that particular stimulus or that particular win or experience, then we would be having a very different conversation. So what ends up happening with you and I is that we're swimming in this cultural ocean that consistently reinforces the message that our worth must be earned. We must always prove how worthy and how lovable we are, and how deserving of attention we actually are, in a sense. And then the last thing, when it comes to why achievement-based identity runs so deep for you and I, it's because this achievement-based identity starts to feel safe and like something we can control and measure. Unlike when you and I are being vulnerable, because it's actually, in a sense, who we are. Because we've been brought up with all of these psychological systems or these ways of generating performance, it feels safe. It feels like we can control it, because I know if I do 1, 2, and 3, this is the result I'm going to get. But because vulnerability hasn't necessarily been rewarded, and you just being you hasn't necessarily been a gold star moment, we don't necessarily have the circuits around that or the neural conversations that are happening in the brain to say, yes, it's perfectly okay, you are still worthy, regardless of whether you achieve the gold star. And so there is a sense of safety in a conditional positive regard, because you know exactly what you need to do to get the gold star. You know exactly what you need to do to be performer of the month or to be employee of the month. So it is safe in that sense because it's predictable and there's that controllable, measurable, quantifiable nature of it. However, what does start to happen, like we mentioned, is that we associate our identity with the accomplishment or with the behavior or the exercise or the win at the end of the day. So the affirmation in that sense in the brain becomes, I am what I accomplish. I am what I do. I am what I earn. I am what I can achieve, which is in a sense a false identity because it's always changing. And so we don't eventually sit with the uncertainty of unconditional self-worth. And at many times, or in many senses, we don't actually even know what that is, what that feels like, how to experience it, because our entire schooling, right from the beginning, even preschooling, we've had this conditional positive regard everywhere, wired into every single system, every single environment, and into every single caregiver relationship and response that we've ever had. So we're always jumping into the world thinking, I am what I accomplish. I am what I achieve. And unless I achieve and accomplish, I am not worth anything. Which, even as I say it, it's quite sad, but that is in essence what does start to happen. And with many of us, and as I was doing some reflection for this episode, this is something that I came to, is that this is very much a core belief of mine, and with a few different core memories that come up as I think about it as well, especially like I had mentioned earlier on around my own academic journey. And this was from primary school all the way up to when I did my final year in matric, or grade 12 or 12th grade. It was the exact same experience, because even then I had the academic colors and the this and that, and it was all with the intention of receiving some of that validation. And yes, I do enjoy learning. Absolutely. I mean, I am the unlearning lady, so I love learning. So that's definitely part of it. But a lot of it at the psychological level was driven by that relationship, that synonymous relationship between validation, attention, and achievement. So then let's go into how we notice. How do we notice when we're chasing validation and we're not being on purpose, showing up on purpose, achieving on purpose necessarily as well, right? So 3 things I want you to look out for here as well. 1, pay attention to your emotional states after you achieve. After you achieve any kind of validation, what you might find is that there is a sense of emptiness. So you might get the employee of the month and feel a sense of immediate anxiety about the next goal and the next thing we need to achieve and how we move on from that. So if you do feel that sense of emptiness whenever you've achieved the big thing that you had set yourself out for, then you know that there might be a relationship here between the achievement of the goal and the chasing of the validation, and not necessarily achieving because of purpose or in a purpose-driven way. Second thing that you might also want to note is noticing whose approval you're unconsciously seeking. Validation-driven goals, they often have a specific audience in mind. You're often thinking, oh, my colleagues, I need them to know that I don't just talk a good game, I also walk my talk. Or I really want my grandma back home to know, that I'm trying my best. Or I'm still trying to prove to that primary school teacher that I'm worth being seen, or that I'm not as educationally challenged maybe as she once said I was, or whatever it is. Often there is an audience that we have in the back of our minds, parents, peers, societies. But purpose-driven goals, they feel meaningful, and they don't necessarily have to be attached to an individual. However, having said that, they can be attached to an individual in the sense that I am doing this because eventually I know it will benefit so and so. Now, there's a very thin line here, because oftentimes we may, say, oh, I'm doing this because it's going to benefit my kids. But it also does mean you and we need to sit and do a gut check. That is it because we are unconsciously seeking the validation or the approval of our children, which is a very real thing. Are we seeking for them to see us a particular way? Or are we doing it because it feels like us? It feels like the thing to do for our own purposeful meaning and sense of self. And so there is a very thin line there, but there is also a bleeding over or an overlap between the two. And then the very last one is examine your relationship with failure and setbacks. Often one of the things that I advise here is have a look at some of your core memories that come up when you think about academia, when you think about validation, when you think about approval back home. Maybe started off pre-schooling. What were some of the memories that you still hold, that are still active within you, or the first memories that come up in your mind when you think about being validated, when you think about being approved, especially when it comes to academics, schooling, and learning? What are some of those that come up? And I think that with examining those relationships, one of the key ways to know what conditionings you have and what internal unconscious replays are happening in your brain at any given time that are actually informing your behaviors is understanding what your core memories are, or bringing some of those core memories to light. So think about that. Give yourself an opportunity and maybe break it up into different parts of your schooling journey. And I can always think of a few that's always quite interesting, and some of them still evoke very deep emotion within me. Emotions like shame, emotions like fear, and just bringing these to light is already going to help you to start the journey of moving a lot of the stuck energy through, and bringing those to light also helps you and I to regulate some of the emotions that come from it, so that they are not at an unconscious level consistently putting us in a place where we're seeking validation and we're seeking attention by achieving key things within any given environment. So let's close off then with the tools. So what do we do? if you and I don't want to just not just build a resume and tick boxes and get all the gold stars. I mean, the gold stars are great. Don't get me wrong. But we also want to build those tools for self-trust, right? And an innate sense of worthiness that is quite deeply rooted in that self-trust, or is interlinked with that trust in one's own being, not necessarily one's own achievements, because you're not what you achieve. You're not what you are able to do and churn out and give to the marketplace. You are a lot more valuable than that, because you are you. And often that relationship is not created when we're growing up. So we do start to associate that validation with what we do or the achievements. So 3 things here when it comes to tools. 1, I'd like to encourage you to practice internal referencing. And the way you're going to do this is you're going to regularly check in with your body and your emotions rather than external metrics. So one of the things that you can do is use your head, heart, and gut brains. So you can either put your hand on your heart at any given moment, maybe a few times during the day when you're about to start a big new project, or you're about to sign off on something, or you are stepping into the next meeting. Put your hand on your heart, put your hand on your gut, and ask yourself, how does this feel in my gut? What am I perceiving that other people will think? Are there any people that I'm doing this for? Put your hand on your heart and you ask yourself, does this feel aligned with who I am? Does this feel like the kind of thing I'm doing for me that I would be proud of when I hit the pillow at night? So all of those key things, those internal references and those key gut checks or checks with your body help you build self-trust, because you consistently honor that internal wisdom that you already have over those external expectations, external validations, and extrinsic motivations. So that's the first one. You do your internal referencing as often as you possibly can. Hand on heart, hand on gut, or just feel in. How does my body feel about this? And your body will often tell you if you've conditioned or helped or learned how to actually listen to it. Second thing is you're going to develop a values-based decision-making practice that will help you to make decisions based on your personal values, so that you know when you are out of alignment with your values. Often with many of us, we are already just making decisions. Yes, we have our values, but we're making a lot of our decisions based on what's happening in the moment. So we are literally a moving rudder at any given time. So what you want to do here is you want to have 3 very clear, for example, 3 very, very, very clear values. And then whenever you're about to make a major choice, you want to filter that major choice through your core values, rather than looking at, what's going to impress that person, what's going to get me validation. And ask yourself, am I living true to what I say are my core values? And that might mean that you end up choosing a lower status job that aligns with your value, maybe, over one that might be perceived to be quite prestigious and one that doesn't. So gradually building that trust in your own judgment, quite similar to internal referencing that we started off with. And then the very last thing that is a tool that I'd like to recommend to you is to create space for unproductive activities, especially those activities that feel like they really feed your soul, but they just are so unproductive. That in your achievement-based mind, you would look at those activities and go, what is the value in this activity? It is a waste of my time. I'm not earning anything. I'm not becoming a better person. I'm not necessarily building a skill or an expertise. Those are the very activities I like to encourage you to create space for. Unproductive, not completely mundane, not necessarily helping you check any boxes, not helping you get any stars. So those are things like your long walks, your creative hobbies that have absolutely no commercial goal. You're not creating the art because you're one day going to sell it. You're just creating the art, or simply just being present with loved ones when you are on the floor with the kids and you come back home. Just be there, just be present, because what you are doing with that very behavior, or with creating space for unproductive activities, is you're disassociating value, love, attention from achievement and productivity, because the two are not mutually synonymous. So what you want to do is, when you create that space for unproductive activities, you are rewiring. You are helping your brain to understand that productive doesn't mean love. Productive doesn't mean attention. Yes, it might be associated, those two may be associated in your environment at work. It may have been associated when you were in school, but it's not necessarily the case. And when we do that, or when we leave the two consistently associated or mutually dependent, then what we do is we condition ourselves to always be seeking validation and then performing in order to receive that validation, or stuck rather in that cycle. Because sometimes you do want to perform because you do want the bonus, or you do want that phenomenal holiday somewhere on the planet that you've never been, and that's great. But you also want to create a place within yourself where you understand that just because those two things are associated, it doesn't make you any less valuable when you don't get them. And that's the most important thing, because when we have that self-trust in who we innately are, when you prove to yourself that your worth isn't dependent on constant productivity and achievement, that's when you truly win the game of the gold stars, because you are independent of them. But as long as we are dependent of them and reliant on them, then we literally are, in a very real way, slaves to that system, or that gold star syndrome that's always determining how we show up, who we say we are, who we are doing things for, and why we are doing things, or what we are performing in order to get. And that's not who you are, and that's not how we're going to show up. So it's time to challenge that. It's time for us to realize that in many senses through our schooling we may have chased those gold stars and lost ourselves, but this is now our opportunity to shift that, to rewire, to unlearn, and to relearn. So a quick recap of what we covered today. 1, we looked at why achievement-based identity runs so deep, and one of the key concepts that we looked at there was your conditional positive regard, and that association between our worth and that affection or even love with the trophies and the metrics and the gamification and everything else. And this still happens quite predominantly today. And then the second one is, or second part of our conversation was how to notice when you're actually chasing validation and you are not being or performing on purpose. And then very last, we closed off with some tools and things you can do to help you build that self-trust. And one of my absolute favorite there was internal referencing that you can use on a consistent basis. Check in with yourself and see how you're feeling or where you are performing from. Are you performing from a values-based decision-making practice, or are you performing because it's associated with looking impressive and being validated in any given moment? But also, it may not be one or the other. Sometimes it's a combination, but just the awareness of it will help you decide from a very, very different place. And also that growth and the transformation really starts from there as well, should you wish to apply it at any given time. All right, Unlearner, that's where we wrap up our episode for today. I'd like to encourage you to go back to some of the episodes that we've had previously. One of the episodes that I'd like you to look to either watch or to listen to is an episode that we have titled how to, let me just have a, yes, found it. It's titled Identity Shifts, and it's episode 60. So it's part of season 3. Really great episode to listen to as well. If this is the journey that you're on, I think you are absolutely going to adore that episode. Go over and listen to it. And then finally, as we wrap up, you probably know your learning style, as in which of your 5 senses you are most inclined or best able to learn, process, integrate information through. But you probably don't know your unlearning style. How do you best unlearn when it's time for you to challenge your perspective, when it's time for you to change, when it's time for you to shift? How best do you do it? So I'd like to encourage you to go over to theunlearners.com and take the quiz. Find out what is your unlearning style as we wrap up this episode. All right, Unlearner, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode on chasing stars and losing yourself, and how you and I are going to start from this moment to unlearn gold star syndrome. It's been myself, Zanele Njapa, the Unlearning Lady. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this episode. And I and you will join hands once again in the next episode of the Unlearners podcast. Bye for now.
The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.